March 1st, 509 BC, a man stands atop a four-horse chariot, draped in purple and gold, rolling through streets choked with roaring crowds. His name is Publius Valerius, and today he is something no Roman has ever been before. A free man, celebrating victory, not for a king, but for a people. This is the first triumph of the Roman Republic. And the story behind it? It involves a tyrant's unspeakable crime, a genius who pretended to be an idiot for decades, a father who executed his own sons, and a duel to the death between two cousins on a blood-soaked battlefield. And here's the part they never tell you. If this single day had gone differently, there would be no Roman Republic, no Roman Empire, and quite possibly no Western civilization as we know it. Stay with me. To understand why this triumph mattered, we need to go back to a Rome that looked nothing like the empire you're imagining. No Colosseum, no legions stretching across continents. In the late 6th century BC, Rome was a city-state clinging to the banks of the Tiber River, surrounded by enemies. Rome was formed by a coalition of Latins, slaves, and outcasts who built a city on the banks of the Tiber, using the river as a natural defense. In its early days, Rome was a convenient stop on the north-south trade route in Italy, which brought wealth into the city, but also the greedy eyes of the mountain tribes that surrounded them. And Rome was ruled by kings. Prior to the rise of the Republic, Rome was ruled by kings, whose power over the citizens was confirmed by the granting of imperium by the Senate. These kings were powerful warlords, whose right to rule was maintained by their ability to lead armies and take plunder for the Roman people. The seventh of these kings was a man named Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. History knows him as Tarquin the Proud. His cognomen superbus is Latin for proud, arrogant, lofty, and he earned every syllable of that name. Tarquin the Proud earned his reputation through ruthless rule, which alienated the nobility and common people alike. His disregard for the Senate, autocratic methods, and excessive taxation led to growing unrest within Rome. He came to power through blood. Tarquin was said to have gained the throne through the murders of both his wife and his elder brother, followed by the assassination of his predecessor, Servius Tullius. He ruled as an autocrat, ignoring the Senate, taxing the people into the ground, and using forced labor to build grand monuments to his own ego. Tarquin behaved like an autocrat and was not interested in consulting the senators, who obviously felt ignored. Tarquin's grasp on power weakened as he made many enemies among the Roman nobility, particularly disenfranchising the senators. But what finally broke Rome wasn't politics. It was something far more personal and far more horrifying. But before we get to the crime that tore the kingdom apart, I need to introduce you to a man who had been waiting silently, patiently for years for exactly this moment. His name was Lucius Junius Brutus, and on the surface he was nobody, a palace fool, a simpleton that Tarquin kept around for amusement. But it was all an act. Brutus was the son of Tarquinia, daughter of Rome's fifth king Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, and sister to Tarquinius Superbus. According to Livy, Brutus had a number of grievances against his uncle the king. Amongst them was that Tarquinius had put to death a number of the chief men of Rome, including Brutus's brother. Brutus avoided the distrust of Tarquinius's family by feigning that he was slow-witted. In Latin, Brutus translates to dullard. Think about that. This man watched his own brother be murdered, and instead of raging, instead of fighting, he swallowed every ounce of fury and pretended to be stupid. For years, maybe decades, he shuffled through the halls of the very palace where his family had been slaughtered, playing the clown, because he understood that the only way to destroy a tyrant was to first survive him. And there's one moment that tells you everything about who Brutus really was. He accompanied Tarquinius's sons on a trip to the Oracle of Delphi. The sons asked the oracle which of them was going to be Rome's next king. The oracle responded that the first among them to kiss their mother shall hold supreme sway in Rome. Brutus interpreted mother to mean Gaia, the earth, so he pretended to trip and kiss the ground. The princes laughed. They thought the fool had stumbled again, but Brutus knew exactly what he was doing. He kissed the earth itself, mother of all things. He was playing the longest game in Roman history. And then, the moment he'd been waiting for arrived. And this is the moment the fool dropped his mask. According to legend, Brutus grabbed the dagger from Lucretia's breast after her death and immediately shouted for the overthrow of the Tarquins. The man who had spent his entire life pretending to be no one suddenly became the most dangerous man in Rome. What happened next moved fast. The four men gathered the youth of Galatia, then went to Rome, where Brutus summoned the people to the forum and exhorted them to rise up against the king. The people voted. The monarchy was abolished. The Tarquins were banished from the city forever. According to Livy, Brutus's first act after the expulsion of Lucius Tarquinius Superbus was to bring the people to swear an oath never to allow any man again to be king in Rome. In his place, the position of king was replaced with 2 consuls, heads of state ruling jointly for 1 year. Rome's first consuls were Collatinus and Brutus. The year was 509 BC, and the Roman Republic, from res publica, the public thing, was born. The Senate and people of Rome, Senatus Populusque Romanus, were now in charge, birthing the initialism SPQR. But freedom was fragile, and Tarquin was far from finished. Before the deposed king could march on Rome from the outside, he tried something more insidious, a conspiracy from within. He sent ambassadors to Rome who secretly recruited noblemen to betray the Republic and open the gates. Amongst the conspirators were 2 brothers of Brutus's wife, Vitellia, and Brutus's 2 sons, Titus Junius Brutus and Tiberius Junius Brutus. The conspiracy was discovered, and the consuls determined to punish the conspirators with death. Brutus gained respect for his stoicism in watching the execution of his own sons, even though he showed emotion during the punishment. Let that sink in. The man who had endured decades of humiliation to bring freedom to Rome now had to sit on the consul's chair and watch his own children die, because they had betrayed the very republic he'd built. He gave the order himself. He watched the lictors carry it out. The historian Livy tells us that his face showed the agony of a father, even as his hand held steady with the duty of a statesman. Jacques-Louis David would later immortalize this moment in one of the most haunting paintings of the neoclassical era. It shook audiences during the French Revolution, because the question it posed was timeless. What are you willing to sacrifice for freedom? And Brutus was about to sacrifice one more thing, the most important thing of all. With the internal conspiracy crushed, the external threat arrived. The deposed king Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, whose family originated from Tarquini in Etruria, garnered the support of the Etruscan cities of Veii and Tarquini, recalling to the former their regular losses of war and of land to the Roman state, and to the latter his family ties. Tarquin was coming home with an army. Roman consuls Lucius Junius Brutus and Publius Valerius Publicola divided their forces, with Brutus commanding the cavalry and Valerius the infantry, advancing to intercept the invading Etruscan coalition. The 2 armies met at a dense woodland on the edge of Roman territory, the Silva Arsia, a densely wooded grove approximately 10 miles from Rome, where the terrain favored ambushes and limited maneuverability for large formations. And now comes one of the most dramatic moments in all of ancient history. Opposing Brutus, Arens Tarquinius, son of the deposed king, led the Etruscan cavalry. Upon recognizing each other as cousins, Brutus having been raised in the Tarquin household before feigning foolishness to avoid execution, the two charged directly in single combat, their lances piercing one another simultaneously. Both fell dead from their wounds, marking a Pyrrhic exchange that intensified the melee, but removed key leaders from the cavalry phase. Two cousins, one a prince of the old world, the other the architect of the new. They rode straight at each other, spears leveled, and in one terrible, symmetrical instant, both struck home. Both fell. Both died. The man who had pretended to be a fool to survive a tyrant, who had led a revolution, sworn an oath before the gods, sentenced his own sons to death. His journey ended here, on the forest floor, tangled with the body of his enemy. But the battle wasn't over. With Brutus fallen, Publicola assumed overall command and shifted to infantry assault, where Roman legions exploited superior discipline to rout the Etruscan center. The infantry also soon joined the battle, the result being in doubt for some time. The right wing of each army was victorious, the army of Tarquini forcing back the Romans, and the Veientes being routed. At first, neither side could claim the upper hand. The Romans pushed back the men of Veii, but the warriors of Tarquini drove the Roman left wing backward. It was chaos. It was carnage. And then, as night fell over the blood-soaked forest, something extraordinary happened. On the night after the battle, Livy reports that a voice believed to be the spirit of Silvanus was heard to come from the nearby forest, saying, "More of the Etrurians by one had fallen in the battle, that the Roman was victorious in the war. One more Etruscan dead than Romans." That was the margin. That was how close the Republic came to dying in its cradle. Whether you believe a god spoke from the trees that night, or whether this was a story the Romans told themselves to make sense of an impossibly close battle, the result was the same. The Etruscan army finally fled the battlefield, so the Roman army claimed the victory. Freedom had survived. By one life. Valerius collected the spoils of battle and returned to Rome, where he celebrated a triumph on March 1st, 509 BC. His four-horse chariot subsequently became the traditional vehicle for a victorious Roman general. Picture this. He wore the regalia traditionally associated both with the ancient Roman monarchy and with the statue of Jupiter Capitolinus, the purple and gold toga picta, laurel crown, red boots. He was drawn in procession through the city in a four-horse chariot under the gaze of his peers and an applauding crowd to the temple of Capitoline Jupiter. This wasn't just a parade. It was a statement. The Republic had been tested in fire, and it had held. The man in the chariot wasn't a king. He was a consul, elected by the people, accountable to the people. But even amid the celebrations, there was grief. Valerius held a magnificent funeral for Brutus and gave a memorable speech. The women of Rome mourned him for a year as an avenger of a woman's honor, because he began his revolution to avenge Lucretia. And Valerius himself, he understood something that few men in his position ever have. Power is most dangerous when it looks most righteous. For his actions, Valerius was given the name Publicola, that is, one who courts the people. When Romans grew suspicious that Valerius might be building himself into a new king, after all, he lived in a grand house atop a hill overlooking the Forum. He did something almost no one in history has ever done voluntarily. He tore his own house down during the night. Publicola eventually built a smaller house at the foot of the hill, instead of the grand house he had on top of the hill, He literally tore down his own palace to prove he wasn't a tyrant. Then he passed laws that would echo for centuries: the right of appeal, provocatio, from the decisions of a magistrate, and the forfeiture of all rights for anyone convicted of plotting to restore the monarchy. Now, here is where this story leaps across time. Over 2,000 years later, 3 men sat in New York writing a series of essays to convince the American people to adopt a new constitution. Their names were Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. They needed a pseudonym, a name that would embody Republican virtue. Most readers probably recognize Publius as Publius Valerius Publicola, a Roman patriot, general, and statesman who lived in the 6th century BCE and who, according to Plutarch's Lives, saved the early Roman Republic several times from tyranny and military subjugation. In the Federalist Papers, a collection of 85 essays promoting the adoption of the United States Constitution, written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay in 1787-1788, the 3 statesmen used the allonym Publius in honor of Publicola's role in establishing the Roman Republic. The man who tore down his own house rather than be suspected of tyranny. His name became the pen name behind the intellectual foundation of American democracy. And it doesn't stop there. The ancient sources, including Roman historians and writers, often emphasized the lineage of Marcus Brutus, drawing connections to Lucius Junius Brutus to underscore the weight of his decision to assassinate Caesar some 450 or so years later. The implication is that Marcus Brutus was upholding a family tradition of defending the Roman Republic against tyranny, just as his ancestor had done. The dagger Brutus pulled from Lucretia's body in 509 BC cast a shadow 4.5 centuries long, all the way to the Ides of March, 44 BC, when another Brutus drove another blade into another man he believed had become a tyrant. The concept of shared governance, of elected leaders, of power that answers to the people and not to a crown. The seeds of all of it were planted on that chaotic, blood-drenched day in the Arsian forest and watered by the triumph that followed. March 1st, the festival in Dies Natalis of the war god Mars, was the traditional anniversary of the first triumph by Publius Valerius Publicola. The Romans chose to celebrate the birth of their freedom on the birthday of the god of war, because they understood something we sometimes forget. Freedom isn't given, it's taken, and it's defended again and again and again. So the next time someone tells you that one person can't change history, remember Lucretia, who chose death rather than silence. Remember Brutus, who played the fool so he could one day play the liberator, and paid for it with his sons and his life. And remember Publicola, the man who celebrated Rome's first triumph, and then demolished his own house so that no one would ever mistake him for a king. 25 centuries later, we are still living in the world these people made. The question is, what are we willing to build, and what are we willing to tear down to keep it? If this story moved you the way it moved me, drop a comment below. I want to know, which moment hit you the hardest? Brutus at the execution of his sons? The duel in the forest? Publicola tearing down his house? I've linked some incredible books and sources in the description and in the first pinned comment so you can dive deeper into early Roman history. Livy's Ab Urbe Condita is where most of this story lives, and Plutarch's Life of Publicola is a masterpiece you can read in a single sitting. If you want more stories like this, the kind of history that doesn't just teach you facts but makes you feel what it was like to live through them, subscribe and hit the bell. Every like and share helps this channel keep telling stories that deserve to be remembered. I'll see you in the next one.